everybody who has come to watch this episode of Talk Like That with me, Mark Dallas. And Arika Okrent is my guest today. Arika is a linguist and an author, and she has very graciously agreed to be interviewed by me about her latest book, which is called Highly Irregular: Why Tough, Through, and Dough Don't Rhyme, and Other Oddities of the English Language. So, Arika, thank you so much for coming on and being a part of this.
Thanks for having me. I'm just getting started. The book is released in July 1st, so it's not officially released yet, although I think they are sending it out already. And I haven't been talking about it that much, so you'll get a fresh view. And
awesome, that's great.
Maybe some moments of like, what did I say about that? I don't know.
So this is the first. Yay!
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I downloaded a copy of it on my Kobo. It was actually a great excuse for me to. Sorry, it's not a Kobo. I'm sorry, Kobo. This is actually a Kindle. So I don't know. It's all the same to me. This is the Amazon version. So I downloaded. This was a great excuse for me to get one of these. Because, like you said, it's not on the shelves yet, but it will be out pretty soon. And I'm a big fan because I read your another book of yours, which was about constructed languages.
In the Land of Invented Languages.
In the Land of Invented Languages, which I highly recommend people get. If anybody has ever heard of Esperanto or even Klingon, a language that's used in Star Wars, Arika goes and speaks to people who can speak these languages that were invented. However, this book is not about invented languages. It's about English, which is not invented at all. It's something that came to be, and you explain that in the book. So I've got lots of questions for you about your book and some of the things that you talk about in it. It's a fascinating book. And anybody who's curious about why English is so irregular and messy and why it could not possibly even have been an invented language, because nobody would be insane enough to come up with the crazy words and spellings that we have. So first of all, I'd just like to ask, I wonder, in a couple of chapters, you explain how English went from being a bunch of Low Germanic dialects to becoming a bunch of Low Germanic dialects peppered with Old Norse and French borrowings spelled with a foreign alphabet. So how does this account for the mess of spellings that we have today?
The approach I take in the book is who's to blame for this mess. So in a way, it is related to the Invented Languages book. And then that was about the history of this human impulse to improve on language. Let's make it organized. Let's make it logical. Let's neaten it up, make it easy to learn, make it perfectly make sense. And that project failed again and again and again through history, because language just doesn't want to be that way. So then I turned to English and the weirdness of it. And it is weird. People throw up their hands about English all the time, especially when it comes to spelling, especially if you're a foreign language learner of English. You want to ask, why? Why do you say it this way and not that way? And the native speaker sits down and say, well, you see, it's... And as you start to try to put it together, it falls apart. There is no logical explanation for why kernel is spelled that way. There's no logical explanation for the phrasal verbs, why we have that part with that part. And the more you try to explain it, the more it just falls apart. Your logic doesn't work.
I know this from personal experience because I taught English as a second language for many years. And those are the kinds of questions that you do get from learners. And then it does make you think, well, why is it, And of course, the natural thing for a lot of teachers to do is to say, well, English is stupid, which it's no more stupid than any other language. It just deals with it in different ways. And of course, when you scratch the surface, you find out that it has a very weird history. Oh, by the way, I am wearing my grammar police shirt today.
Oh no.
To harken back to the, my ESL days. But yeah, you scratch the surface and you find that it's got this weird backstory. But yeah, so
the original title, the working title when I was working on it was "What the Hell English." That became the title of the first section. But that is the attitude that I'm talking about here. That when someone asks you a question and you're working it out and explaining it, and then you get to the point where you're just like, "What the hell, English? Why are you this way?" The frustration of it. So the approach to answering that question is, because English is weird, it's a mess, it's chaotic, but it's not just weird and a mess and throw up your hands and say, that's just the way it is. Oh, well. Yeah. It's weird that way for reasons that you can explain. You can't explain the rule and here's the rule you should follow, but you can explain why. And maybe it won't always be a logical explanation, but it will be an explanation. And the approach that I took was to say, who is to blame for this mess? And that gets you to the history of the language and all the different influences. So we've got...
And which you do so well. Yeah, you do it so well. Like, because whenever I used to get a question like that from students, like, oh, why is that there? Why is it this way? And if I didn't know the answer, then like another time I'd research it, and you end up going down the rabbit hole and finding out more and more and clicking on more and more links, right? Whereas your book brings it all together, and it's you've obviously written it for the lay person. It's for anybody who, even if they don't have a background in linguistics or teaching pedagogy or anything, it's like they can pick this up off the, well, when it's available on the shelf, they can pick it up off the shelf and start reading it and understanding it, because you explain it in very, I don't want to say simple terms, but you explain it like you would to the guy down in the pub.
Well, it has pictures too. It has illustrations.
It has great pictures.
It's definitely, you're supposed to look at it and say, this looks easy to read. This looks like you can look at you just read the cartoons and look at the pictures. You can pick one question and like, why do we say slowly but not fastly? You can find that question. You could just read that one answer and it will be everything you need to know about that answer. But if you start from page 1 and go through it, you get the history of English, and you can read it either way as a little, pick one out.
It's the kind of book you can just dip into and then go in any direction. And of course, if you download the Kobo version, then you can search as well, which is what I love about this one. You could just like do a search and then like, oh, I wonder if that word's in there, and then it will find it for you. So yeah, the history, you cover that in a couple of chapters, and also you name your chapters. So like you said, like let's blame the French, let's blame the snobs, and so on, and which is
who's to blame? Blame the barbarian, the original tribes that laid the language down. What do we blame them for? Well, the GH in our spelling. We can blame them for that. Some strange grammatical orderings that we use in old phrases, we can blame them for that. Then we have the French. Blame the French. We can blame them for a lot. And people who are familiar with the history of English in a general way are all pretty familiar with the fact that like English was the Germanic language, and that it's got huge French infusion, and it totally changed our vocabulary, and a few other things too. But it sort of explains exactly how that changed. And it wasn't just that the French came in, forced everyone to speak French, and that changed the language, because they didn't. The French came in and everyone just kept on speaking English. It was when the French, who had taken over after many, many generations, themselves started to speak English, and they're grasping for words for things that weren't talked about much in English, like government administration and land owning and things, they had to grab a French word to keep on talking, and French came in and in that way, until it was thoroughly mixed in. And then we can blame, let's see, blame the barbarians, blame the French, blame the printing press, and that, I think, is the part that makes English the most different from every language has its irregularities, every language has weirdness, but English does have a special kind of weirdness, especially in its spelling. No other European language that uses the Latin alphabet has the kind of mess that English has with regard to spelling, and I think we could blame that on the printing press.
Well, yes, yeah, exactly. I think that the printing press, well, literally solidified it. But I mean, the fact that we use if I can use the word, a foreign alphabet to represent our language. So we're using a, well, it's still called the Roman alphabet or the Latin alphabet. We're using that alphabet to represent a Germanic-based language with sounds in it that are not really truly represented in that alphabet anyway. And so I think it kind of starts there in a way. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint where all the trouble begins, but it kind of starts there where I believe we became Christianized. When I say we, I mean the only English speakers at that time were a few thousand people on an island that eventually ended up calling themselves the Englaland, the English, right? But then they were basically a load of Germanic tribes living on this island, which were, formerly Romans, Romanized Celts. And then it was like, hey, I got this book, dudes. It's called the Bible. It's all in Latin, but I'll explain it to you in English or whatever your Germanic languages are. And it's in this weird alphabet that's not runes. So, I think that's where it all began.
So what are we going to do for this ch sound? Because they don't have that in Latin, and there's no Latin letter that makes the ch sound. So they use, different, they could put a rune in, or the th. Latin didn't have a th. So how are we going to write the th? Well, eventually settled on the th. That's going to stand for th, which is 2 letters, 1 speech sound. And the ch became gh, but then we stopped saying that sound. But they still say it in other Germanic languages, and then there's less inconsistency because we dropped that sound around the time or leading up to the time, taking over hundreds of years, but while printing press was solidifying how we write everything. And even after we completely stopped saying it, it's too late. That's how we write it, and that's how we're used to it. So.
That's right. And I'm sure you have experience with printers where you might go to a printer and say, can we make that change? Printer will go, well, yeah, but it's going to cost you this many $1,000s to change it. And then you're like, it's okay, leave it as it is. So I'm guessing that probably had some kind of influence when Caxton brought in this Eastern Asian invention and was like, hey, there's this new way of, making all these books. You don't have to write them anymore. You can just print.
A lot less labor intensive. But I think at that time, people really didn't care about spelling all that much, because English wasn't really a language. It was just like this lowly habit people had. It wasn't like, you're not going to write like theoretical treatise in English in the beginning. So they didn't have, too much. If you can read it, it's working. If you can pronounce it, it's working. There were no copy editors. There wasn't even like editorial house style. The printers themselves, the compositors, had their individual habits of doing things, but they didn't fret about it very much in the beginning.
It was more like English was seen more of, to have a book actually in English, it was kind of, back then, it was more of a novelty than anything, wasn't it? Because you're more likely to have things either printed in Latin, the scholarly language, or maybe even French for a while, possibly. But yeah, to have things in English was kind of an unusual thing. Like you said, it was. And then the other thing was like, well, if you do print something in English, which English? You know, is it going to be the English of Kent? Because I know some stuff was printed in Kentish. Is it going to be from the north? Because they were quite different. And like you say in your book, you bring up the story of the
in the north, they're still saying the ch. They're still saying
right.
lo
Yeah.
and stuff. So.
Well, yeah, and in Scots as well. Scots
Yeah.
being a North British, well, got to be careful here. Some people call Scots a dialect, and others call it Lallans as a language. So yeah, they still have the up there, of course, but yeah. So again, it was like you've suddenly got people that are printing stuff, and when it comes to English, it's like, well, what do we? There was no standard yet, right? There was no such thing as a standard English yet. But and we've completely glossed over the so-called Vikings, everything.
Yeah.
But all of that's in there.
Part of the Germanic. They're also Germanic tribes. They switched some things in there a little. They gave us the whole GIF controversy. That's
right, GIF and GIF. I understand that the inventor of the file, he used to call it. I don't think he's alive anymore. I'm not sure, but even if he is, he used to call it a GIF. The actual inventor called it a GIF file.
GIF. I think I'm naturally inclined to GIF when I say an animated GIF. I think that sounds.
Maybe maybe that could possibly be because you're American. Because I've heard Americans say Armageddon.
No, that sounds totally wrong to me.
Right. Yeah. That's the other thing. Like even in America, there's no standardized. Okay, you got standardized printed American, but being a dialect coach, I know that there's lots of different accents down there even.
Yeah.
So, and that was the case then when the printing press came in. There was no such thing as a standardized English. So it was like, okay, what do we write it in? So another thing I wanted to ask you was something we haven't mentioned is something called the Great Vowel Shift. And I understand that made a whole mess of everything as well, because when the printing press came in, we
bad time.
Everybody spelled things the way, you spell things the way that they were pronounced, but it kind of set in stone. And then the whole Great Vowel Shift. So could you, for those of you who don't know what the GVS is, could you just explain that as you do so well in a nutshell?
Well, basically, I mean, you can picture vowels in a space, and there's vowels that are higher, your tongue is higher, your tongue is lower, your tongue is more back or forward. And what happened in the Great Vowel Shift was the vowels went traveling. So vowels that were low became higher. So like ah is a low vowel, like in the word nam, like that's the German pronunciation of name, right? And that was the English pronunciation of name, but nam became name. That raised a little bit, and that's nam. Nam is now name. We still spell it with an A. We don't spell it with an E, which would have been the way of spelling that sound. When Old English had very regular spelling. Old English is you see what you get. All the vowels, all the consonants are there and pronounced as is. By the time you get to Middle English, you're still writing nam, but you're saying name. And then if you're at the top of the chain, then like your E, that's a very high vowel. Where are you going to go? Well, it turns into a diphthong. So team became time, and hoos becomes house. When it got to the top of the range and then got pushed by the ones below it, we're moving up. Now we're the same. So you gotta be different and distinguish yourself. You move up. But this process takes hundreds of years, and it's happening in some areas and not others. So they pronounce things differently there than they do here. And we still have some remnants. It's still not completed everywhere. We say, how do you say roof, or roof? Well, that is a Great Vowel Shift change there. The OO spelling used to stand for a long O. So book was book, and
book.
Or no, book, right? An O, long O, not a U sound. So it's book becomes book becomes book. So the O goes up to U, And then in a subsequent change, some of those oohs got formed into a relaxed ooh. So we got look and book, but not for, school, stayed school and didn't go to school or whatever, that
Yeah.
some words, but in some places they don't, like some places they say ooh for all of them. Some
Yeah.
places book and Luke are the same, so
Yeah. Well, you go to somewhere like Newcastle, then
mhm.
you're quite likely to look in a book, like
Yeah,
and other parts of the north of England. But
they
one
didn't
thing,
finish the vowel shift change.
yeah, yeah, it's like they didn't get the memos because they're so far northeast, right? So they didn't get those. Like, hey guys, we're changing the vowels a little bit this time. So
Yeah,
yeah, they're like, we didn't get that one, like we still call it a book. Um,
right. And in
but
the middle of all this, the printers are printing it, the books are going out, and people are becoming literate by every day, more and more people becoming literate and learning to read and learning to write and using the spellings they're used to because they see, and then it's just gotten solidified and the vowels are still changing, but it's too late to change the
yeah,
spelling. So
the change exactly, yeah. And then there are other words like on the double O, for example, blood and flood. Those
mhm.
went even further. Those
Yeah,
words were changed even.
just those two. Like I think
Yeah,
just only those two double O vowels decided to make another change.
yeah.
Yeah.
Except I'm from Birmingham, and in
Mhm.
Birmingham they're still pronounced with the so it's blood and flood, just like book. So they didn't we because we didn't get the sound in the Midlands. That's just for Southerners. So when it comes to the UK, yeah. So yeah, so the Great Vowel Shift is like that was a huge upheaval in the change of how like the spelling and pronunciation kind of a gap formed over
Mhm.
those centuries as well. And yeah, I always had this theory that the Great Vowel because people will say, well, why did this happen? And my theory is that there was the Black Death in
Mhm.
the 1340s in Europe, and people started to that killed like a third to a half of the population of most places. So I think people started to move around a little bit, would sometimes move from a village to another town and looking for work and it was a so I think that shift with people moving to different places
Mhm.
where there would be different accents, I think that may have started it. I don't know, but that's my theory for a reason why it all that whole thing kind of got kick-started and
Yeah.
moved.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accepted, not like, oh, we know the reason and it's a black plague because we don't know the reason. It's one of those things linguists are really good at describing the change and describing what happened, but when you say, but why? Then it's kind of like,
We don't
I
have the
don't know.
data. Yeah,
It happens. It happens. The why is a lot harder, but certainly, the plague had everything in history was somehow affected by the upheaval of
yeah,
that, and we know that language pronunciation is a social phenomenon. The people's ways of speaking are socially determined and also social signals that they're either not quite aware of or aware of and using very intentionally. So yeah, if you got lots of different groups and social class upheaval was happening because of this, the lots of people die, then people get to move into different professions, different classes that they weren't able to before. And there's all kinds of signaling you do with the way you talk. We know that, of course, now. Yeah, that's obvious. But yeah, all through history, the way you talk is a social signal, and so yeah, that's going to influence accent. But we can't say exactly how. Like why did the low vowels raise? Why did
right.
you know that it's not
Yeah,
something. It all happens over such a long period of time that you can't really go back and say like, oh, this is the one catalyst for that. It happened. It
yeah,
happened, and then it went backward, and then it didn't happen there, and then it did happen here, and then like in the
right.
end, we can look at that 300 years and say, this is what happened. But in any
Yeah.
particular moment in those years, we don't know what's going on.
Exactly, because like you said, it happens so gradual that you even now, like you said, it we still have vowel shifts happening now,
Mhm.
even today. I mean, you can hear how the Queen, for example, even the well, I should specify the Queen of England, who's also the Queen of Canada, where I am, and so she speaks differently now. Like her RP is quite different from the way it was 50 years ago.
Mhm.
And you know that so that you can see that in one lifetime
Right.
how
Right.
there's
We've
been
got a recording of the whole thing. Like that's great data. Like we can
exactly
we can say, what did
exactly
it sound like 50 years ago? Okay, pull up the tape.
yeah exactly and of course that's a luxury that we have
Mhm.
these days is that we have sound recordings of that so we can actually hear how those changes have happened throughout generations. Um, Another thing I noticed in your book is that you mention allophones without using the term
Mhm. Mhm.
allophones,
Yeah.
which is
Right.
great. So I'm going to leave that one to you to
Mhm.
explain what allophones are and remind you that you do this with the word
Mhm.
of.
Right. The word. So the question that you that someone might ask you, a kid or your colleague from another country, what of? Like, why doesn't that spelled with a V? Like that's of spells of, and then if you're used to it, you think, oh yeah, like notice it when you're reading it all, but of should be spelled with a V. It's pronounced very clearly as of, and the reason for that is that English speakers did not hear it as a V when it became uh, the useful, thoroughly saturating the language word that it is. Of V and F were the same sound in English, essentially. So people didn't even hear a difference because yeah, they were. It was completely determined by where they occurred in a sentence and with respect to stress and everything else. That you didn't have to hear the difference because one would never be confused with the other. There were no words where it made a difference.
Right, because
And
you would have like we have the singular knife, which
Mhm,
we spell with an F,
mhm,
which back in those days would have been spelled CNIF, right?
mhm.
Knif.
Yeah,
But then the plural became knivas, which
mhm.
was still spelled with an F at the time,
Right.
but you would just naturally, it was a natural thing to just
Right.
voice it in that
You've got
environment.
a f between two vowels in knivas. It's the vowel that comes after it. It makes it turn into a V, and so you say knivas. But it's the same word, the same sound. It's not a different sound. And the
Yeah.
example I use to sort of get what this psychological experience is the L. We have in English the L. We have a light L and a dark L, and we think of them as L. They're not different English sounds, but you notice that when someone doesn't use it correctly, the dark L and the light L. So the light L is before a high vowel, like in the word light. Light. It's a L with the tip of the tongue, front of the mouth, light. And the dark L will come after a back vowel, and it's in the word full. So your tongue body is much further down, and the sound it's darker. So l, lo, l, lo, light L, dark L, and we use them completely correctly when we talk. We don't have to think about it. They're just L's. We don't have to learn it. But if you're Italian, you do have to learn it because you only have a light L in Italian, and you're going to say light and full, and you're going to use
Right.
the light L where it should not be.
Yeah.
It should be a dark
Even
L.
if you're, for example, if you learn English with an Irish accent, or if you're from Newcastle, so in those accents too,
Yeah.
they only have the light L.
Mhm.
So Newcastle, and can't think of a place that ends with an L in Ireland, but I know there are some. Um, and yeah, same thing. So in Italian, and some other accents where people speak English with those. But you also mentioned Albanian, because apparently in Albanian, those two different L's are actually what a linguist would call phonemically different. So they're thought of as two separate sounds, right?
Yes, they make a difference. You can say the wrong word if you say the wrong L. There aren't many minimal pairs, they're called, like words where it makes a difference. So the example that I found was loom and loom, which one means river and one means sludge or mud or something like that. And it makes a difference because they're different phonemes in the language, and psychologically for the Albanian speaker, they're saying a different sound. But now in English they are psychological. We have van and fan. We have verse and first, or there's a lot of words where it makes a difference, but that came from French because we did not have a V letter or sound until the French influence, and we took that letter from them and started spelling words with it. But of is so common and so written thousands of thousands and read thousands of thousands of times, for a person who's literate, that it's not going to change. It's not going to, okay, well, let's start spelling that one with a V too. It was too late for of. But
exactly. People would just start going like, "What? This is wrong. This is just." But it's a V. It's pronounced like a V, so let's start spelling like a V. Like, no, don't change it. It's
gonna
look. It ain't broke.
Yeah, because reading is a very habit-forming thing. Once you've learned to read and you've read enough, a change in what you're used to trips you up. You cannot read phonetically written English because it's like 10 times harder than just pulling out your habit, which is, oh, I see the word book and I know it's book because that's what it looks like. You don't have to sound it out. It's because you're literate and you've gotten used to it. Now, if you're a kid or if you're learning how to read, it's hard and it's a problem. But once you've got it, it's really hard to change it, and that's why spelling reform has never caught on.
It's never taken off. So many people have tried and failed, but and I think there are still people probably a little bit older than me that have been through like the educational system in the UK where they've become scarred by it because like they were being educated during the period where it's like, okay, guys, it's 1967, so we're all going to learn the new way of spelling the language. Like, okay, teacher, and then that messed them up forever. So
I didn't realize that there was like in the schools a spelling reform.
I believe that. I don't know if it was a nationwide thing, but I know there were some attempts at doing that, whether it was certain school boards or a particular board, but I know there were some attempts at it. It was before my time, so it's very anecdotal, but it's out there. Yeah. I love that.
They have done it. Some countries have done it, but it's never very many words, like, I don't know, in Norway, or they'll have like this kind of verb, we're going to do it this way, but it's never, let's spell it like it sounds. It's always very targeted to a very specitic thing.
Yeah.
People grumble about
it. They did it with bookmal, and I know Germany did. Germany had a very small reform with changing OE to O umlaut and a few things like that.
French had one recently with the onion got changed and some other words, but it takes generations for it to actually finish like people start using even the bookmal thing in Norway, like they're still will have both ways. It's really hard to do, and the only way you can do massive kind of language reform like that is if you have a mostly illiterate population. Then you can do it before everybody has learned it.
Yeah, because it won't make any difference to them.
Yeah, right. And then they'll learn the new way, and that'll be the way. But that's how you do a successful language reform. You do it before literacy.
Yes. Yeah, good point. One thing that I love about I mean, there are lots of things I love about this book, but one thing is that you name check the IPA.
Mhm.
So the IPA being the International Phonetic Alphabet, not the other IPA, which I also love to drink, the India Pale Ale, but there's you briefly mentioned the IPA, and I think it's in the chapter where you talk about why the letter Y is
Mhm.
a sometimes vowel. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. Well, why it comes from the confusion we have between letters and speech sounds. It's very hard if you're a linguist and you want to write for a popular audience. You are really, it's really, it's really a problem that you can't use the IPA because you need to distinguish the written symbols from the spoken sounds. And they are very different, but we're accustomed to saying, oh, a K sound. When I say a K sound, I'm using the letter and I'm using the sound. But when I say an A sound, well, what do I mean? Like the A in saw or the A in aunt or the A in can't, or, what is the A sound? We And with the IPA, you can be specific about it, and there's a different symbol for each one of those vowels.
Yeah.
But you can't use that, and you can't expect like, oh God, everybody should learn that so that I can talk about my thing and they'll understand it. No, you have to use workarounds like the A in saw, the A in ant, or whatever when you write about it. Well, no, you can't use the A in ant because there's so much variation on that one. The A in, I don't know. But yeah, so Y is a consonant and a vowel because it can be used as a consonant speech sound or a vowel speech sound, but it's just a letter, and a letter isn't a speech sound. So yeah, A, E, I, O, U, those are vowels, and mostly they represent vowel speech sounds. And the other ones, they mostly represent consonant speech sounds, but sometimes not. But Y is the one that wavers the most between the different speech sounds. So a vowel speech sound is technically a speech sound that lets the air flow through. Your mouth shapes the air, but the air is flowing freely. And a consonant has a blockage of some kind. A consonant is a blockage. It's either with your lips or your tongue, or some part of your mouth blocks the airflow to form a consonant sound. So that's what the Y is in year. It's the back of your tongue is blocking the airflow and then letting it go. That's the consonant. But in the word, cherry, that Y on the end is a vowel. And and that's not such a problem because there are other letters that can go two ways like that. But Y is a big one because in the middle of the word, like in the word gymnasium or syncretism, or I don't know, pick some more normal words, but there's Ys in the middle of words that is where it's serving as the vowel of the word. So Y is some scratches on a page. It's a letter. It's a symbol. And when it comes to speech sounds, it can be a consonant speech sound or a vowel speech sound. So we don't get to say, so A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y, but sometimes not. But there are other, like the U in sun is the vowel of that word, but the U in united is standing for a consonant vowel speech sound.
Yes.
U. Or the O in one is a consonant vowel w. It's the blockage, and then the w. So we don't call O a sometimes vowel because it's not happening that often. But the Y is in a lot of the middle word. All these words we borrowed from Greek have this Y in the middle. So it gets to have it both ways.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It sort of masquerades as both things, a vowel and a consonant, depending on where it turns up in the word, and and it kind of highlights how, like, the way we use letters to write our language, or you might call orthography as a fancy word, right? It's kind of the relationship between the print on the paper and the actual sounds that come out of one's mouth it's kind of a fuzzy sort of thing going on there.
Yeah, it's very important to keep those two things distinct when you're talking about language in a technical way. But in a non-technical way, we fudge that difference all the time, and that's okay. Not everybody's supposed to be talking about language in a technical way all the time. But then we run into these like sometimes why? Wait, aren't they just vowels or consonants? Why is that one? So that's,
and then a lot of people become surprised when you tell them there aren't actually 5.5 vowels in the English language, but it's more like, between 16 and 20, depending on the accent.
We have way fewer written symbols than we do speech sounds for vowels.
So. Right. And then you have to bring out the chart, wheel it out, like, look at this vowel quadrant. And then everyone goes, oh my God, this is scary symbols. But anyway, that's something I sometimes teach when I have clients to explain that kind of thing too. Another thing I wanted to ask was about your approach to attacking prescriptivism, because you say that people in the Middle Ages used to think of Latin as a real language, and a perfected language. These are your words: a perfected language, a language of rules, while English was just something people did. And you touched on this a little bit earlier. And now we think of English as a real language. We expect it to follow rules and conform to logic, but we forget that it is also just something people do. I love that.
It's and Latin too was, when it was a spoken language, and in the Middle Ages it was more of a scholarly language. There weren't people like, they were doing sort of official things with Latin, but centuries before that they were like talking about changing diapers and whatever, all daily non-elevated things had ways of being talked about in Latin, because there's people just doing what they do with language. All language that's alive is doing that. But not all languages get the respect of being an institutionalized, standardized, elevated language.
Most languages aren't even written down.
Yeah. And like, compare it to something like, like Haitian French, people will have the idea that it's French, but like something wrong with it. It's like French, but like not getting quite.
It's not real French. And Quebecois gets the same sort of deal up in Quebec. Joual gets the same kind of, from French people especially, like, well, that's not really French.
Yeah, right. Because it's not French, it's Quebecois. And it has its own rules, and they are rules. And you can see it as what English was in the Middle Ages, like a language people were using that didn't yet have like an institutionalized, here's your grammar book. Or, well, I guess Quebecois does have that now, but the respect didn't come from the features of the language. It came from the society and the culture changing, and people deciding what they were going to do with the language in terms of education and official institutions and stuff. And that's the next one to blame. Blame the snobs is the next one. So after blame the printing press, you have blame the snobs. And that's when we get into, let's standardize this language. Let's set it down what the right way is and the wrong way is. And who decided those things? It wasn't like handed down from heaven. It was people making decisions. And sometimes they were making bad decisions. Sometimes they were just going on their own. This is what I like, and I'm gonna.
And also, like you mentioned in this in the chapter about blame the snobs, it was basically people showing off their knowledge of the classics. That there were ways of showing that, well, I know Latin, so I'm going to put a B in debt and a P in receipt, because there are, distantly related words in Latin where there is a P and a B. So I'm just going to show that off by spelling it that way with a flourish of the quill.
Yeah, we all know what this word is supposed to be. But it didn't take. They tried to do that with words like saint. They tried to put a C in there, like SAICN,
Really?
because it's sanctus, So,
Yeah.
But that one just didn't take. People didn't start writing that. And there's other ones like that. Some of them took. Or what was the one? Receipt, but not. There's another. Deceit. We don't put the P in deceit. It's the same. Right. Could be there for the very same reason.
Because it's in deceptive.
Right.
And deception.
That P is there, but we don't say, we don't write deceit with a P, but we write receipt with a P. And that's, what the hell, English?
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's your student saying why, and that's the answer, But it's not a great answer. It's like, someone decided that, and then it caught on, but it didn't catch on in this one.
Yeah. Excellent. Cool. And well, I just have one other question, which is, like you said earlier, your book is peppered with great illustrations, which I understand are by Sean O'Neill. Who is he the same guy who does your the squeaky whiteboard thing?
Yeah, the YouTube videos.
Yeah, the YouTube videos, which everyone should check out because they're really funny and very informative and very interesting. Like, I've been a fan of those for years, so those are great. But I had to laugh when I saw that he makes a reference in one chapter to the classic movie Network, because it shows two apples. I'm going to bring it up in a second. I'll show it to you now. So give me 1 second. I'm just going to share my screen here. Then you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we go. Can you see that? There's, yeah. Oh, I've got to go back to that. Okay, so there's two apples, and there's one saying, "That's one crazy apple. I'm mad as hell, and I just can't take it anymore." So that's from the movie Network, which is awesome. It's a classic. So those are two apples talking about what we now call an eggplant, right? Well, in America, it's called an eggplant, but where I'm from, it's called an aubergine.
Aubergine, yeah. That's the chapter. Why is there no egg in eggplant? Like, what's the deal with that? Why do we call it an eggplant? It's not an egg. And it was kind of an exotic vegetable in the Renaissance. So it had different names in different places, and the Latin name for it was the crazy apple, mala insana, the insane apple. And so that's that eggplant being the crazy apple there.
It's funny. It's so cool. I mean, that gives you an idea of the kind of the style of the illustration that's used throughout. And
he was great coming up with ideas for that, and I think it really enhances the text. If it's I always told him when I gave him a piece to do the drawings, I said, any place you find like it's getting kind of heavy, like draw that, like do something for that to help.
So basically you gave him the draft. And said, go through and come up with some ideas for bits where it gets heavy, and then tell me what you think. Yeah. Nice.
Basically, it's kind of the way we do our videos. I give him the script, and then he comes up with a visual version of it, which I'm a 100% word person, no visual intelligence at all. So it was always interesting to see, like, oh yeah, you could do that. And it was never what I thought it was going to be. And then for this, I would give him the chapter they're all like a little 1,000, 1,200 word parts, and he would. And when you're thinking about what to draw, like any place you feel like it's getting a little too much, then let's do a drawing.
Put it in there. Yeah, it's great. It's a great idea. I love it. So, just before we wrap up, I just want to tell everybody that, again, remind them that Arika's latest book is out. It's called Highly Irregular: Why Tough, Through, and Dough Don't Rhyme, and Other Oddities of the English Language. It's an awesome book. It's currently available on Amazon's book list. You can download it to a Kobo or to Kindle. That's where I have it. And it will be coming out on the shelves as an actual physical object from July the 1st.
Yeah.
So
I think my parents got the notification that it was going to ship on June 25th finally. So it's coming out a little earlier if you've ordered it already.
Great. Awesome. So Arika, Okrent, thank you so much for indulging me and coming to talk about your new book and about the weird irregularities of the English language. And hopefully soon I can sort out the weird irregularities of my hair when the barbers open up here in Toronto. Thank you so much, Arika.